Great. Looks like people are coming in, and I think we'll wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Great. Well, I think we should get started now. It's 12:31. So welcome, everybody. This is our Talent Connector webinar. This is one of the whole series we have done that have been tremendously successful. And once we get started, Olivia, our ChIPs communications and marketing person, is going to put in the chat the link to some of the past Talent Connectors, and I would invite you to take a look. Today, though, we're going to talk specifically about from interest to offer, the recruitment life cycle. And we have a panel here of experts that are going to take us through that. I'm Bridget Johnson, and I'm ChIPs Director of Partnership and Business Development. So I'm the person who has the privilege of working with our ChIPs members on your sponsorships and ticket sales. So quickly, I just want to remind everybody to mark your calendar. Two of our major annual events are coming up. Our Next Gen Summit this year is back on the East Coast, and that's on Thursday, April 16th. And we're being hosted by Amazon at their HQ2 in Arlington, Virginia. Next Gen Summit is back on the West Coast and will be in Los Angeles, October 21st through 23rd. So please reach out to me if you haven't secured your sponsorships. I'd love to work with you. One other bit of housekeeping today. If you have a question for anyone on the panel, please put your question in the chat, and Rose, our moderator, as well as Olivia, will be checking the chat for the questions, and the panel will be answering those questions during this event. Now I'm going to turn this over to Rose, our moderator. She'll introduce herself, as well will the panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Rose?
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rose Marcus-Gagnon. I am the Philadelphia ChIPs chapter co-chair, as well as a former member of the ChIPs GC Bootcamp Cohort 3. And I am so excited to moderate this panel. I have had the privilege of presenting this panel back in October to the ChIPs bootcamp cohorts. And I was thrilled to be, on the same panel with Jamie and with Dana, who I will let them introduce themselves, because this topic is so valuable and the information is one of those things that it's very difficult to get. So just a little bit about me. I am a EAGC for PTC, which is a global pharmaceutical company that specializes in the rare disease space. And I have been off and on over the course of my career looking for new opportunities or been recruited for new opportunities. So again, this topic is near and dear to my heart. So I'll let Jamie from Korn Ferry introduce herself, and then Dana.
Thank you, Rose. Hi, everyone. Jamie Masser. I'm a senior client partner at Korn Ferry. I am by background a lawyer, though I went inactive with the California Bar many years ago. I've been working in executive search for 15 years, specifically focused on legal, regulatory, and compliance officers. So that's been across industry, wholeheartedly my focus, and love to contribute and participate in these meetings. And as Rose said, we also presented and sat on a panel in October. So we're excited to tell you a little bit about it, the process and answer questions. Thank you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Dana Etra, as it says there somewhere under my face, and I think quite big on the screen. I'm a managing director and head of the Boston office of FW Cook. We advise the Human Capital Committee of the board on everything that rolls up to their purview, which includes, among many other things, a lot of focus on compensation, executive compensation, equity compensation of all sorts. Rose, back to you.
Yeah, great. So just kind of give you an overview of the hiring life cycle. Again, we're going to touch through getting noticed, so getting on radar screen for someone like Jamie to recruit for an opportunity. the screening interview that you have with either the recruiter or the talent acquisition member in the target company, the interview cycle, negotiating the compensation package, and what are the components of a typical package, as well as hopefully getting that final written offer. So, Olivia, next slide. All right, challenging job market. This has been really interesting. It's been a topic that you see a lot of articles in Wall Street Journal, as well as many other media and in the news. Fewer job postings, more candidates. So, Jamie, would you like to give a little bit of your perspective as to what you're seeing?
Sure. So, and again, the perspective that I'm bringing to the table on this is kind of going to be um, from an executive search standpoint, right? And so we're kind of talking mid-career to senior executive. So, you see more job postings earlier in career, say that first transition, fifth year to seventh year out of the law firm, say, to go in-house. But once you're talking about more solidly in-house roles, usually, especially at the VP or above, they are often going to an executive search firm or using their internal recruiting. They may not always be posted, and it's often about, again, the concept of recruiting is reaching out to people who are already, an attractive candidate and sort of convincing them, bringing them to the table rather than kind of sorting through job applications. HR may still at some companies, have requirements to post a job, but you're probably much better served by, again, a lot of what we're going to talk about, which is sort of staying on radars and networking and proactively reaching out to kind of key people rather than applying to a lot of jobs online. And then, Rose, would you like me to kind of maybe give some thoughts on some of these other points here?
Yeah, no, I'd please. Thank you.
Um, the risk averse piece at senior levels, that's been particularly acute in the last, I'd say, 3 years with just sort of a less stable or the perception of a less stable economy, right? Even though we all know at the end of each year things seem to be okay. Economically, there's just been a lot of instability. And so that has resulted in some risk aversion on behalf of our clients, which are the companies, the senior executives kind of retaining us. What that means is they are on paper kind of less likely to take a chance on somebody unproven, which is where, say, having a good relationship with either their internal recruiting department who's reached out to you or with an executive search professional if they're going, to a firm like ours, to sort of understand your background, advocate for you, push our client to really think about what it is that they need rather than get super hung up on what's on paper. And that is very much a part of our role and what we do. So again, just kind of going back to this final point of networking, referrals, and also partnering with various recruiting partners internally and externally.
Dana, I know you're in the executive compensation space. What are you seeing in terms of employee retention, especially because it's more of an employer's market than an employee market? Have you seen any change in your practice?
There's certainly not the frothy labor market there was 4 or 5 years ago. When we were in 2021, equity was being thrown around like candy because stock prices were really high, retention was really low, everybody was job hopping, and there was a lot of opportunity for significant pay increase for taking a new job. With the cooling of the job market, we've kind of reverted to steady state normal practices. So we're not seeing giant inducement packages. There was a real upward blip in sign-on bonuses. I think Jamie indicated that she's still seeing sign-on bonuses for most roles, but it's not inflated the way it had been however many years ago. And there's a little more opportunity to be more discerning in hires. So we're seeing a longer ramp up to the actual hire because it's not quite as hectic as it was when everybody was jumping ship.
No, that's really interesting. And again, like going to the next slide, most roles are now filled with someone that's like a known candidate, like versus an unknown candidate. And that's like, I guess the key is getting noticed. So, again, there's some points here. I know in our talent connector, ChIPs talent connector, there was a really good a webinar last fall about using LinkedIn. Liz Bliss had presented. Again, becoming a thought leader, networking through organizations like ChIPs. Jamie, do you want to speak a little bit more on trying to get on your radar screen to be selected
Sure.
as a candidate?
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge the responsibility that somebody in my position has, and we know this, to also be reaching out and expanding our networks, which we do. So it's a two-way street. So we also, I make every effort to constantly be kind of meeting new and upcoming talent, people I don't already know. But the way in which, if I'm kicking off a search, and this is going to be pretty standard across any of my peers in the industry, we would start with sort of it's a multifaceted approach to getting in the market and talking to candidates. We're going to look at previous searches. I'll look at previous searches that I or one of my colleagues have done in the last 3 years, so it's recent. That's going to have probably some interesting people on it that would also be right for my current client. So people we already know. So you're going to go to that low-hanging fruit. We're going to think about who are the kind of CEOs or business leaders who would give us really good referrals to very business savvy legal partners in this particular area, who we trust their judgment. And there will be 5 to 10 of those, that I'll call as sources. We're going to engage our internal researchers who will kind of map out a search strategy and a target list of certain companies or industries and then companies where we think we're going to find analogous or relevant talent. And then they will go to LinkedIn and they will start combing through LinkedIn, various, bar networks, all of that. And they'll come up with, again, that's the desktop research that they will then sort of clear with me. And we will decide on priority outreach to new people, which will be via LinkedIn, email, any manner. Also, again, as say I'm reaching out to people I already know, they might say I'm not interested, but you should talk to this person who I think is so talented. So there's all those connectors. We also will go to law firms and ask some of the law firm partners. I think law firms, you take it with a bit of a grain of salt because sometimes they really want, they have a vested interest, right, in a close relationship to in-house counsel, but they can give really, oftentimes really great introductions as well. So, I mean, we're kind of like reaching out through that entire network and it's happening all at the same time. But hopefully that gives you some idea as to if you want to be on radars, how do you make yourself easy to find, I guess, in that environment.
These are really excellent points. And I really appreciated the law firm because I've gotten a lot of good referrals for job opportunities through law firms that I've either been my former law firm or law firms that I've worked with as a client. So those are always a good resource if you're in the hunt for a new opportunity. And I liked hearing about how you go not just to other like lawyers, but like other industry, like CEOs, CFOs, because those are you're going to be the person that you're going to be selling yourself to. You're going to be working with like a VC or private equity or CEO. And most people think, oh, I'll network amongst lawyers. And that's always great. You get good feedback, but also think about industry groups, people that you interact with that might not necessarily be lawyers, but someone that could be on a board or be in the industry that you want to target yourself to and give your elevator pitch and saying, I'm interested in this opportunity that's like, XYZ, and this is my skill set. And do you know of any opportunities that come to mind? And even if they don't have that opportunity at that point, they might keep you in mind for a future one.
And Rose, that's such an important point, and something I want to go back to is um, making sure to be building always internally, in fact, your relationships cross-functionally. Because while the legal function is very challenging, right? And to be successful as a practicing lawyer takes a lot of intellectual horsepower and refining knowledge and all of that. But kind of just having other lawyers referring other lawyers is not enough to kind of flip up to that, especially the executive level piece, or even kind of like the VP above. We always need to have references from people in the business who can truly articulate and attest to the business savvy buzzword that truly just means solutions orientation, connectivity to the product or the service, figuring out how to ease friction for the business. Here's examples. I loved working with this person and her team, right? Just a very, very much confirmation from business leaders outside of the legal function, in addition to the confirmation from impressive senior legal minds, right? Who say, like, excellent lawyer. So we need both. So I would just always think about cultivating those internally and keeping up those connections. If somebody goes to another company and they're now in marketing or, a leadership role on the product side, like keep connected to those people too.
That's all excellent advice. We got a question from the audience. Whether becoming more visible through networking, social media, thought leadership, and strategic contacts really defined if someone's a good fit. And then kind of to your earlier point, having contacts or the privilege to speak at panel sounds like a bit of helping out someone's luck, but could it be any competitive for candidates who might be a better fit? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's heavily weighted.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's one of many ways you can think about making yourself easy to find. I don't think it's a must-have for everyone. It needs to be authentic to who you are and also the area of law or the industry in which you practice, where it makes sense.
This is a different step in the process. There's getting noticed, which is what we're talking about here. And these things are all effective for getting noticed. Your question relates
it's not
to
about fit. Yeah.
once I'm noticed, is it a good fit?
Yeah.
But you can't turn down a job opportunity that you're not offered, right? So this is about first being able to get in the room and have the conversation. And you may not be the right fit, but the reality is if you're not the right fit, you wouldn't have been, regardless of how they noticed you or how your resume ended up on their desk.
Yeah, and look, I think if I'm reading kind of maybe between the lines on this question, there is an aspect of some clients, like the perception of as somebody maybe being just too self-promoting rather than focusing on actually doing the work at their company and contributing. So, I think again, this needs to be authentic to who you are and how you practice and operate. And it's just one of various levers and ideas we wanted to kind of put down as bullet points as to ways to be visible. It is not the only way. It is not the most necessary way, but it is a component to consider.
And I think what's good about, speaking on panels, publishing, teaching, I think it's also public speaking. That's a big Achilles heel for a lot of people, or something. Again, I'm not comfortable sometimes speaking in a large forum, as evidenced sometimes today. But I think it helps hone your skills too. So, it might not necessarily be something that, I'm going to use this to be able to get to my next position, but it allows you to get better at being a storyteller or being able to articulate concisely your points and get in front of other people.
That's a great point, and I think one more emphasis. That's my fancy way of saying I'm going to repeat what Rose just said in different words, but it's the best way to practice for an interview is to interview. And so even if you might not be the perfect fit for that job, even if you suspect you're not the perfect fit for that job, the more interviews you take, the better off you're going to be at interviewing, and the more you're going to grow your network. If you're not a perfect fit for that job, but you do a good job networking, when the right job for you does open up at that organization, or when that person moves to a new organization, they're going to think of you. So getting noticed and getting the interview is worth it no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I've met so many impressive people over the last 15 years, and only one person on a search is going to get the offer, right, and accept the offer. There's room for one, right, in the role. But there are just incredibly impressive people that either it wasn't right for them or it ultimately wasn't, the perfect or the final fit for the client. That person, I call those people again, I'm so happy to introduce quality candidates again. So I think even if it's a first conversation that's a bit more informational with anyone, like if you approach it kind of with that real genuine kind of curiosity and interest, it's good practice, it's good networking, and they remember, even if you're not right for the role or you're not yet senior enough or you don't have the industry expertise that they ultimately really want, they remember you and they will come back to you. And I've seen that many times, many, many times.
I absolutely agree. And that's like the whole goal is like the screening interview, which Olivia, the next slide. Um, Again, it's kind of more of a casual conversation to assess if it's the right fit. But Jamie, I know from your perspective, what do you assess when you have this screening interview with a potential candidate?
Sure. And there are, I have two phases. We have two phases of interviewing. So there'd be the initial, what we would call the screening call, or these days often the teams, which are usually shorter. They're about 30 minutes. And we are trying to explain to you and share with you our client, the role, while also getting just a high level sense of, would you be, a potential fit? Would you ultimately be interested, right? And then if so, then we schedule, a deep dive competency-based interview that is an hour long. And that's where we're going to dig into a bit more around credibility, exec presence, company fit, all of that. But, the screening, we're kind of just boom, 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 trying to get through some high level pieces. Scope of the role, that is important. There are going to be must-haves and nice-to-haves. So when you see a position specification for a role, if that's sent to you, before the first conversation, don't count yourself out, right? If you don't check every single box. I think it's a very good question to ask. What are the must-haves in this role? Like where's the key emphasis, and why, right? Because that tells you something about the business goals and why they're emphasizing those. But the position specifications are usually like an ideal wish list. You cannot craft a person out of clay. So, think about kind of where you bring the most credibility and scope fit. And like I said, don't count yourself out, and have that conversation with the recruiter. We can talk more. It kind of depends. There's a bunch of bullet points on here. I think would love to know what the group would like to hear more on. I mean, some of these are kind of big ideas, and we can try and define them or put more teeth around them. Executive presence being one, leadership narrative, company cultural fit, which today we're really thinking about that more as alignment to kind of company values, company value set, in terms of how how the company and executive team communicate, how they make decisions, what the values of the organization are, rather than, culture fit, which is a bit nebulous. So anyway, I'm happy to kind of, Rose, jump into any one of these that you think would be more interested, or if anyone wants to pop something in the chat.
I think it's really important, Jamie, when you emphasize that a lot of times people do not apply for jobs. They'll see a job description and they feel like they have to check all of the boxes of the job description in order to apply. And, in what you just shared,
Women in particular.
would be the case.
No, seriously, this is a female-specific phenomenon. The men will apply if they meet half of the criteria. The women need to meet 95%. Sorry, let's carry on.
No, no, no. I absolutely. That's exactly the point I was going to allude to. Um, I think the most important thing I think is that being able to have that narrative to show, you have the right, that you have the right skill set, but you also have like that business acumen, as you mentioned earlier, um, and also that you fit the culture of that organization or that company. And again, I think it's one of those nebulous things. And some companies, some of your clients might be, preferring one aspect of the job description over another. I know, like speaking to some of my, colleagues that are looking for jobs, they think, oh, I need to go back and get additional training, and I need to get like SEC corporate governance training and all that other stuff. And I think that that's helpful, but I don't think it's necessarily going to move the needle. I think there's something extra that people have to demonstrate or show that, it's almost like a chemistry, that there's like that connection that you make when you get into that interview cycle with the different functional leaders of the organization. I think it's kind of one of those things. I hate to use the lawyer's answer, but it depends, I guess. What is.
Yeah, I have a client right now. We're doing a general counsel search for a publicly traded financial services company. And the CEO, I mean, again, this is publicly traded, it's financial services. There are obviously some regulatory, there's a regulatory regime, there's public company filings, there's corporate governance, there's a lot of sort of elements where you could get hung up on they must have all of the specific experience. But the reality is they're leading a team and they're helping strategize the continued growth of a company with the CEO. So yes, in this case, the board exposure and presence is important. Some knowledge and ability to get in front of a board with credibility, important. But they have a team. They have a corporate secretary who's doing K's and Q's, and they don't need to have that specific experience. And the CEO in this case, and not every CEO says this, I will push back and coach them, but this CEO was really upfront, and he was like, "Look, I don't really care that much about them checking all these boxes. This is about their leadership capability and their solutions orientation. I want somebody who I can trust to solve problems and to find paths to yes and answers to tricky situations, because there's always going to be something new coming up internationally. We have a very kind of fluid situation these days. So I don't really care that they like know every single little thing. I need to know that they're able to learn, that they're able to pivot, and that they've shown that they can really effectively continue to grow and drive change within an organization." That's not about scope fit, right? That's about credibility, executive presence, your leadership narrative, how you tie together the arc of your career, and the experiences you've built along the way that are not necessarily about legal expertise, but about leadership and business expertise. So that's just to give maybe an example of that. So again, it's not about checking the box on every piece of the legal expertise. And in financial services, you need to come from financial services usually, right? Like, sure, we're not gonna bring somebody from software as a service to be the GC of a big financial services company, but it could be somebody from crypto, right? So yeah.
Interesting. No, excellent points. Guess we can go to the next slide, but there was a couple of questions that we got.
I do see a good one on exec presence. Yeah, so we should.
This is, I think actually Jamie started to speak to this. It's one of those X factors that you're not going to be able to tell from someone's resume, and that is relatively difficult to screen for in an interview. This is one that's near and dear to me. To me, the best opportunity to assess executive presence is by asking a question that isn't one of their prepared answers. Anybody who's done a good job preparing for an interview has certain answers prepared. You know what you're going to say. You've practiced it a lot of times, so you say it smoothly without likes or ums. And And hopefully you've also practiced it with the right pauses, tone of voice, intonation, etc. I like to say, tell me a joke to see how someone handles themselves when they get flustered, when they're not prepared, when they're not ready. Or to ask them to evaluate something that they shouldn't know anything about, just to kind of see the process. That's the I guess McKinsey style interview. Executive presence is incredibly difficult to identify and to articulate what it is you're looking for, but it's, I don't know, one of the Supreme Court justices in pornography. You know it when you see it. And practice in front of a mirror, speak to yourself, record yourself, and watch yourself. You'll be able to tell where presence exudes and where there's room for thought. Pause before you speak and think about what you're going to say. That's a good starter there. So that's a few quick thoughts from me on that. But Jamie, I think you're.
Yeah, there's two questions here, and I want to make sure I answer both. I'll do the executive presence one second because a little that's got more verbiage around it. And Dana, you also just covered part of that. But this first question here, is it possible that for senior or leadership positions, less competency assessments are being conducted since many candidates are being referred, et cetera, et cetera? So is there a slight bias to hire a referred candidate? So I have not seen this play out that way. So when we have referred candidates, so either a board member, somebody that someone, on the management team or the hiring manager themselves, they actually come over to us and we put them through the exact same experience and rigor that we put all the other candidates through and benchmark them sort of all, against each other, do our psychometric assessments if we're utilizing that tool. So they're all going through the same experience. Now, if a company is not engaged with an outside search firm, I don't know. I can't speak to that, right? Because I'm not a part of those, right, conversations by definition. But I haven't really, I haven't really seen that. And a big focus on competency assessments, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, because that approach it's not perfect, but there are tools to de-bias it if you're focusing on what the actual competencies needed to be successful in the role are, rather than, hey, this is my buddy from such and such. So referrals are meaningful. They are a data point, but and they may come into play more impactfully at the end of a search process where you have 2 to 3, if you're in a position to have 2 to 3 finalists that all are really great and the client's just like, oh, I'm trying to narrow it down. A referral carries weight, but we also will always get referrals and references on all of our finalists. So it's not like somebody has one and people have none. So hopefully that answers that question. Real quickly, oh
No, I just have one or two things. At the very top executive level, having kept the job you're in for however many years is proof of competency. Because at the executive level, you pay with your job if you're not performing. So there is some of it baked in. I would say my experience is consistent with Jamie's, though, that even with referrals, they're still going through the process with the outside recruiters. I would say a difference is that there isn't the same level of competency assessment among the folks you're interviewing with at the company. So nobody's sitting the general counsel down and saying, what can you tell me about section 162M of the tax code and how that impacts that, right? Like that's not the nature of the interviews with the company and the hiring manager, but it's still part of the process.
on executive presence, just to put some teeth on that, like how do we assess executive presence? So there are a lot of different ways to look at that. There's as Bridget put in the chat, which I just make sure you all see, a talent connector webinar on executive presence. Korn Ferry has a coaching seminar on executive presence. Harvard Business Review has a great article on it. Forbes. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. How do we assess? It's about projecting confidence, seeking to inspire confidence is, I think, that's the headline. That can come and be displayed in a number of ways, authentic to who you are. A big point Dana mentioned, clear communication, emotional regulation. So that's, again, not getting overly rattled, not seeming too eager or rushing through or kind of a panicky tone. Again, calm, clear, concise communication. Saying you don't have you don't know the answer to something, or saying, I need a minute to think about that so that I can give you a more, thorough response in an interview to a question, that shows presence, right? It's about you're trying to make an assessment. Would this person be a stabilizing and inspiring force within the organization? So there's a lot there about tone and communication style, clarity, credibility, confidence. I think that's what we're looking for. And it's not determined wholly in one initial conversation, but you can knock yourself off course very quickly in one conversation. I will give you an example. I can give you two examples. And this is how you choose to present yourself. These also happen to be two men, but coming into a meeting with us and sitting back, arms behind the head, really, leaning back like this, very casual, dropping various curse words. Just, that it doesn't take the dynamic seriously. It doesn't show, a level of presence, kind of getting really agitated. And, it was a real question mark. And another person who started eating in the middle of one of our executive assessments just grabbed a bowl and started shoveling food in his face. That's a really questionable. No, those are extremes, but I mean, I'm sharing those because you can knock yourself out of, gosh, the executive presence here is an issue. But executive presence is also going to be determined by references, by experience. Gosh, we found this person, a slow burn in the conversation, but we know that they've managed these really complicated relational kind of issues in this certain area and done so very successfully. So maybe we need to dig a little deeper, think more about it, because maybe she has a different, less conventional approach to influencing, but it gets to the same result, and she's got like the backbone and the confidence of the team, but she gets there differently. Let's explore that more, right? So again, this is about being authentic to you, and again, projecting confidence, inspiring confidence, clear communication, stabilizing force.
Confidence without crossing the line into arrogance.
Exactly. It's a fine line. No, but excellent points. We have a couple like audience questions, but I want to go to the next slide because it's somewhat related. Because this is now when you're in the thick of the interview cycle. And you spoke a little bit about like some of these assessments that they do in addition to the interviews with the key stakeholders for the position. Jamie and Dana, I don't know if you want to talk about what has changed now because employers are more risk adverse in the interview cycle that hasn't been seen in the past. Because again, your clients or companies are much more fearful of not having the right candidate, not having the right fit, and the repercussions if you realize quickly that it's not that person's not going to work out.
So we've seen, Dana alluded to this, there's a longer, I would say once we even say get to a finalist stage, that phase has been extended out a bit with additional data points. So that's going to be oftentimes utilizing certain psychometric assessments, which we always include at Korn Ferry. We have our own, decades worth of data on that. Some clients use GH Smart or some other tools. So that's often a component. References, full 360 references for finalists. So usually that's 4 references from a peer, a direct report, a manager, and then the fourth could be, pick one of those 3, just double up on one of those to get a full 360 view of working with this person. Like, how are they in the trenches? Real data points around that. And it's just been about like being incredibly, incredibly thorough. Whereas a few years ago, and frankly in the prior decade, there was sort of more like, yeah, this is pretty good. It's pretty good. Like, we're comfortable. Like, this person knows that person. They interviewed really well. Like, get an offer in front of them. Go, right? There's just more deliberation, I guess, in terms of getting to a decision.
What is the average placement time from when you get the request to when you get to the yes? Has that time, like, have you measured the metrics? I don't know, Jamie or Dana, if
Yeah.
you've seen that. Has that changed in the
Actually
last year?
shortened. So it started shortening significantly in 2020, and that's just due to using Teams, using Zoom. So usually even the first 75% oftentimes of interviews are going to be happening now using technology. And that speeds up the scheduling tremendously, which keeps up momentum. So that has sped up a search process and shortened the timeline. Where it gets extended, as I said, is on the back end. As I just said, there's a little bit more deliberation there, but that doesn't offset from a timing standpoint how much time has been saved up front, frankly, in quicker scheduling due to not flying, 10 people here and there for every phase of the search process. An executive search takes 3 to 4 months, with kind of our full processes. I would say, sometimes they're quicker, sometimes it's really quick, sometimes they take forever because the client wants to boil the ocean and meet every single person out there, and scheduling gets pushed out. But we've brought down, and this is not just at my company, this is across the industry. I mean, the number of days to completion on average, we've shaved weeks off of the process by using Teams and Zoom.
It's amazing. We had a couple questions from the chat, and they're somewhat related, so I'm going to kind of boil them into one question. One is like the process for applying or interviewing for non-executive roles if you've been in a law firm and you want to transition to an in-house role. And the other one is, and again, I hope I'm capturing the questioner's intent. The other one is transitioning to IP work from a science PhD background rather than a law background. So you're applying for a job, you might not necessarily have had the experience, like you're coming from a law firm and going to in-house, or you're pivoting from something that was purely scientific to something that's more of a legal role. How do you make that change, and how do you make that transition? My just for background, my career has always been pivots and significant swings into new roles, and sometimes taking a step down. When you're talking about the arc of your career. So I don't know, Jamie and Dana, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's about having a point of view and a grasp of what the role is that you're seeking to go after. So you're moving in-house. Some being able to articulate to yourself what would be different about that. And so that you can present yourself and try and draw on examples in your, say, in this example, law firm life, that are going to show I have the potential and the capability to work cross-functionally across the business, or to kind of be efficient with resources. I understand, going from a revenue driving position to sort of an in-house, especially first in-house roles, you may be more like seen as more of a cost center and partner internally to the business, rather than, say, driving revenue with like big deals or IP licensing or something. So I guess you need to think about what that role is, what that position is, and just know how to help the hiring manager or help the recruiter see why you have the building blocks for that and the potential for it.
I bring this back to the 30,000-foot level, which can address both of these, which is make sure you know why you want that role, because that's a big question. If you've never done it, how do you know you want it? And if you don't have the direct relevant background to that role, make sure you can articulate how your background can translate and how you would go about learning what you don't know.
Yes.
On that,
Excellent.
it's I think somebody just asked a question that's a nice segue to our next topic.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, again, like we'll go to the next slide, which is the negotiating the compensation, because that gets to the compensation question when the recruiter insists on the numbers.
When you say the numbers, questioner, I'm going to interpret your question, and please keep us honest here if this is not, as what are you looking for? If they ask you what you make right now, throw up a big red flag.
Yeah.
Nobody should be asking you that. If they're asking you what you're looking for, this is where having conversations ahead of time can be really helpful. Jamie, I'm going to turn it to you because I'm going to start to bumble here. But
this is going to go mostly into like Dana's deep expertise. We'll transition here. I mean, where it obviously we're talking about it a lot with candidates, so I'll jump in and out. But I think first of all, ask, well, what is there a salary, is there a compensation range for this role? In some states, they legally have to tell you, the client, the hiring company has to have a comp range that they tell you in some states. In others, not, but they generally will. Sometimes it's an earlier stage company, it's private, it's fuzzy, they don't really know. But ask that question. I'd punt it back because there should be a reply. And if it's one of those situations, and I hate being in this situation, but it does happen to me about 25% of the time, where I just don't have that. And I'm like, look, what I can tell you is we sort of benchmarked our retainer at this, thinking that the cash comp would be around this. There's going to be an equity component. They're still figuring it out. So a lot of that's going to depend on the market. So if you're comfortable telling me kind of your general expectations, that would be great. And if not, we'll come back to it later in the recruiting process when there's more firm interest on both sides. That's kind of the best I can do there. But, and this is going to come to Dana now and a lot of her information, it's a good idea to have your own sense of how you think about compensation, what's important to you, what you need from a cash flow standpoint, how risk averse or not you are with respect to equity, and just have a general like all in, I'm going to need to feel like I'm making X or more to be comfortable with this level of risk at this company. You want to give some thought to that. Anyway.
Yeah, start with your baseline. What do you need to survive? What does your family need for this to be the right opportunity for you to accept? Okay, that's helpful. Don't tell the recruiter that number. Now, this is something you need to know in your head. After the baseline, make sure that you understand what are the levers. Now, the more senior the role, the more negotiating power you have. That said, the more senior the role, once you're talking about kind of your top two levels within the stack, the more ability you'll have to affect change once you're in the organization. Make sure that if this is a step up role, you are not getting too far ahead of yourself. I have seen many occasions where the leading candidate is released because they asked for something egregious or unreasonable from a comp perspective. And in terms of what's reasonable, that's where having the right conversation with right people ahead of time is really helpful. I'm always happy to chat with someone about this if you want to shoot me a note. And a number of your ChIPs peers have availed themselves of this offer. But it's so if somebody says, I was told that I need anti-dilution protection on my stock, and that's a deal breaker, they are going to cut you loose because they are not giving you anti-dilution protection. And you will have just lost that opportunity. So it's really understanding what are the levers you have to pull, right? It is highly unlikely that unless you're applying for the general counsel role, and even then, that they're going to give you much wiggle room on your target bonus. Because chances are everybody at, L9 has the same target bonus, and that's what it is. Salary, signing bonus, start date, that type of thing. So really understanding the levers, and don't try to pull the ones that are not going to be able to be manipulated, but also that that aren't worth the squeeze, right? I've seen somebody fall apart over a $7,500 difference, and I'm thinking, come on, just deal with it later, right? Get the job. Should we go to the
Next slide?
Can I make a note on timing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, you shouldn't, back to Carnegie's question, if you're feeling pressured or the person's going in really hard at you right off the bat on compensation, I mean, unless they're saying like, look, my client is at these numbers and we know it's kind of slightly below market, or there's not going to be any wiggle room, so we don't want to play a game of forbidden fruit. Is this going to be anywhere within range? Like, say yes or no, right? If they're not giving you anything and they're trying to just extract from you, that doesn't seem okay to me. That wouldn't sit well with me. But I will say the earlier in the process that you can share with the company or with the recruiter your thoughts on comp, what you're comfortable with, what your levers are, what, if you've got some big outstanding kind of equity lump out there, or you have some bonus and it's 8 months into the fiscal year and you're like, I'd be walking away from roughly, 8 months of a bonus I feel that I've already earned. The sooner you get that on the table, the better it is for you and for everyone. Because what leaves a really bad taste in the mouth of a hiring manager, and in fact, for us as recruiters, especially, we should be asking you this question, but is to get to finalist stage and suddenly it's like, oh my God, the candidate that they really like has this big, like, or this financial liability that we just wish we knew about from the beginning. And now it seems like more of an ask. Whereas at the very beginning, and it's not usually going to take you out of things, it's like, hey, this person, they had a really good year last year. The company's doing really well, and their bonus is probably going to be pretty high. They'd be walking away from it. So you just need to know you'd probably need to have a pretty good sign-on bonus to compensate this person. Just FYI, that is much better handled earlier in terms of how that message is delivered and received than later. So the earlier the better, that you feel comfortable and ready to share not what you make, but expectations and specific financial liabilities. Again, that's bonus and that's unvested equity that you can point to. Here is like evidence for that, and why I would need some sort of compensation up front for that.
And there are some things that you should be willing to concede on, right? They may not make you fully whole for everything, but there's a line, and it's going to be a gut feel. But if they're lowballing you too much, if they're being too stingy, that tells you something about the culture and what you're going to experience going forward. Don't ignore that communication.
Can you go to the next slide? Because that talks about all the different, and again, you have to think of it like as the whole package. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to a private company, you might not necessarily get as high a base salary as a public company, but you have more of an equity share, which is kind of the trade-off when you go to a Series A through D company. I don't know, Dana, if you want to speak more to that, or Jamie. And again, these are all kind of what are the components that you would see in a typical written offer, particularly at the executive levels.
The typical offer at the executive level is going to, you're going to have a base salary. That's pretty boilerplate there. Likely an annual bonus as well. This can be articulated in a number of different ways, but chances are that that's being set in a way that's consistent with peers at your level. And so that's not one of the levers that you really focus on. There is commonly, if not almost always, equity associated with the senior level hires. Now, the type of equity and the way the equity is determined is going to vary. And so making sure you understand this, and we get to that on the next slide if we get there. Additional other terms that we might talk about. So severance and change of control treatment, restrictive covenant, post-employment restrictive covenants, making sure you understand those as well. And then miscellaneous bucket here, right? So the title, reporting, which may or may not be in the offer letter, development opportunities, PTO, hybrid, reload, sign-on bonus, right? So if there's something that is important to you, like say you need hybrid flexibility, make sure it's in the written offer. If there's something that's not addressed, you can ask if the company has a policy. Oftentimes they say, here's how we do it, but it's not going to go into the offer. Or they might say, we don't have a policy around that yet. And you can say, I'm going to help them put a policy in when I get there. But this is a kind of high-level laundry list of the type of thing that you would want to check if it's in an offer letter and understand.
Do you want to go? I know we have 3 minutes left.
All right. I'm going to talk as quickly as I can here.
Yeah, on the equity.
So equity is by far the most complicated part of this, and understanding it is critical. And this is not something you can teach in 3 minutes.
Yes.
But a gating question here is, what kind of organization is this? Is this a private company, a public company? All right. And so what's the vehicle? Are we talking about restricted stock units, or just kind of stock that vests over time? Stock options, performance, is there a performance condition? Profits interest is unique to an LLC, not a corp. And boy, is that a complicated vehicle. What's the vesting schedule? Does it vest over 3 years or 5 years? Is it even vesting or backloaded, annually or quarterly? How is the grant sized? Are they thinking about it in dollar value? You'll get to some of this in the way they communicate it to you. If they say, we're going to give you $50,000 worth of RSUs, you know how they're sizing it. If they say, we're going to give you 10,000 options, chances are it's being sized as a percent of the company. What's the grant frequency? So at a private company, it's most likely they're going to give you a grant at hire and you're not guaranteed to get anything else. You might at a dilutive financing event, but you might not. At a public company, it's more common to have annual grants expected, or maybe it's just upon promotion and maybe annual grants aren't expected at all levels in that company. What if it's stock options? What happens once you separate from the company? If you're at a private company, should you expect immediate dilution to your initial position? What happens? What are the acceleration provisions? What happens at a change of control, or if there's a termination without cause? Ask for a copy of the stock plan if they don't offer it. If it's a public company, go ahead and pull it off the internet because it's publicly available, and then you don't have to take anyone through the exercise. But particularly at a private company, make sure we understand what's an exit look like. What's a liquidation event or a liquidity event rather, that would make that equity, that would monetize that equity for you.
Yeah.
That was a lot really quickly there.
Yeah.
There's a question here about tools or research or resources.
That's a good one because we talked about it yesterday, Dana. So I think you want to answer that real quick.
We shared this at the GC boot camp, which is the answer is nah, not really. There are really not great sources out there that are just available to the public. Those are all self-reported, and it tends to not be good data. It tends to not be something that has much credibility with the hiring team. Now, I have access to tons of data on that. So send me an email is one of those other answers. But and Jamie, you might have a different perspective on this.
Yeah. What I would say is ask the company, what is your compensation philosophy? Because they are going to employ certain tools. It could be data sets from various numbers of places. They're going to say, we follow this data set and we benchmark ourselves against these certain peers, companies this size, this stage, this level of revenue, this phase of evolution in company, and we compensate at 50th to 75th percentile. So that gives you a sense of where they are at. So if you're benchmarking yourself against a company that they don't consider a peer, and you're putting yourself at 90th percentile and their philosophy is 50th to 75th, you're not going to get anywhere with it. So that would be the question that I would ask. And HR should be able to answer that question. And if they can't, it's because they haven't figured it out yet. And that's a data point for you too.
And also like you think about I think Dana, you made a really important point. You want to think about the questions that you have for the initial onboarding for the initial offer, but you also want to know again, so a year down the road, 2 years down the road, what does it look like in terms of salary increases and equity grants? These are all things to ask at the onset so that you don't get surprised. I mean, in a legal role, you'll have a lot of visibility, particularly if you're at a GC level. You'll have access to a lot of this information, but when you're interviewing and applying, you might not necessarily do that. So I love, Jamie, your response about asking their philosophy. But again, it's important to see, okay, now you know what you're going to give me for today, but what's going to be like when I'm showing you that I'm a proven performer and that, a year when I meet all of my KPIs, all of my individual or corporate goals, what's next, you know?
Yeah, and that's where also asking what in the last 3 years or the last 5 years, how often has the company paid out at 100% of the bonus target? How often have they granted the target equity? Because again, these are target numbers with respect to the equity and the bonuses usually. So you want to know, are those getting paid out? Because sometimes they're not. And so it's just an empty promise sometimes, right?
That's a great point. I think we're at time. I can't believe it. This whole hour
Oh,
went
it's
by so quick. And Dana, we haven't, we never really get to do a thorough,
Discussion. Yeah. Let's
Well,
do this
thank
in
you so
4 minutes.
This has been a
We should
great
start at
event,
this
and thank
first.
you. Thank you to all three of you for taking your time and sharing your time and talent with everybody on the call. This has just been terrific. And anybody who wants to hear this again, we did record it, so you can go to our link and watch that. You can find Dana and Jamie through their LinkedIn. Rose is part of the ChIPs community and the ChIPs family, so she's easy to find through our ChIPs community. And again, share with us any questions or any ideas you may have, meaning all of you who attended, regarding other topics. We'd be happy to take them on. So thank you again for joining us and have a great day.